For executives, the message is clear. You want to build the best product possible and you want to build it fast. So why put a bottleneck on your product management? Why make the people that is really going to decide how you create value be the busiest and unable to think about those crucial aspects? Of course, there's even more benefits to an executive. If you really have a tool that can tell you what everybody is working on, how your milestones are tracking, you need to free up those people. The PM should be the least busy person in the company because he's the person that needs the most time to think how your product will get to market, how it will solve a user problem, and how are you really going to create value. If those people are busy, who is doing that? You don't need Jira janitors. You need product people that can understand your users and build for them.
Welcome to AI Catch Up, the podcast catching up with the tech products that matter in the AI era.
Hi Jorge, I'm very pleased to have you on AI Catch Up podcast. How are you doing today?
Well, very good, and thank you for having me, Elena. These weeks are very nice as I'm spending some time in Madrid, my home country of Spain, and there's nothing better than being surrounded by the warmth of family.
That is so true. When it comes to the origins of yours and the way you have started, back in 2018-17, you have been already implementing chatbots. That was through the Plug and Play, as far as I recall, right?
We were housed at Plug and Play. Plug and Play has offices a little bit all over the world, and we were in the Sunnyvale offices. The company was called Inventa, and they are a Barcelona-based company that wanted to expand onto the US, and I joined them coming from Chicago to really create what would become the Asia-Pacific and US markets. At the time, we deployed some of the first transactional chatbots all over the world, and it gave us the opportunity to start working in a space that actually we didn't know was going to become the main technological breakthrough of our decade. At the time, we saw it as something that we couldn't even say on a phone call with a client. We wouldn't say AI because it could drive people away. So we actually had to talk about just cost savings and the value to users. Even then, companies would come to us asking like, oh, this chatbot that you have, can it actually say something terrible about my brand? And they were intent-based. Everything that the chatbot would say would be things that the company had already predefined. And it is funny how today, when actually a chatbot can say something terrible about your company or even offend the user, clients are doing the opposite. They're coming by the hundreds asking if they can also launch a generative AI-based chatbot. So the world has changed quite a bit for this space, and it has been pretty interesting to see the transition from the inside.
That is definitely the case, and we are all, I think, still not 100% sure whether the main medium that we are having in the human-computer interaction space is a chatbot. We will see how it will change. But at the same time, I'm very curious how that has actually impacted your current approach with Zantrack.
In the end, we humans are pattern recognition machines. So things that look like patterns over the years at the time feel like serendipity. And even entering into the AI space wasn't as much a conscious decision. I started just receiving a couple of classes back in my alma mater. The first one was called emotional computing. And we were just learning how to identify human emotions from recorded speech and how to impart those emotions into machine-generated speech. That was my first touch point into AI. And I mention it because I think it's pretty interesting, the perspective. AI is not so much just about automating tasks, but it is about really getting to understand what we think, what we say, even more so than to generate something after, no? And in Inventa, when we were launching chatbots, the first couple of years, the first year and a half, we were focused on automation. And although the companies loved the cost savings, we kept seeing how users really did not like feeling like they were being automated away. And this created a decrease on satisfaction scores. And it was at this time that my current co-founder, Pablo, that was in the product side of Inventa, and I was on the services and deployment side. We sat together and found a couple of possible solutions that helped really bridge that gap. Users, what they want is access to human knowledge. And so instead of just trying to limit the scope of human connections, we should make them a little better. We introduced at the time, mixing a couple of our solutions, the ability for chatbots to perform transactions on behalf of the user. Either add orders to cart, perform an e-commerce search, create a ticket for them. In a way, these started to make users feel empowered. And this is the key pattern that now, after the time, I can identify that users and most AI solutions shouldn't be after plain automation. They should be looking for what are the items that they can augment of the human experience so that the whole becomes a better output. We should not be looking just to automate what we enjoy away, but rather take what we don't enjoy so that we can actually focus on human judgment, so that we can keep our products and our businesses be human-centric. And AI is a technology, just like the internet was, and is a tool. We shouldn't see it as the be-all and end-all. It's not the objective. It's, if anything, means to get to a better end.
That is something that remains as a highlight in my mind is how you have said it. We want to empower users to have the access to human knowledge. And that is something that is super fascinating, especially since the human conversation will never replace the AI-generated one. At the same time, if the user is having at least a small bit of human interaction, of certain emotion that is being conveyed, that is definitely helpful.
And it can only be learned through those human experiences. Like, you need to know which human emotions you need to impart, no? You probably have seen a relatively big mistake that happened with Facebook not too long ago, in which they added reactions that happen on a chat based on the words that are being used. And when somebody had a big issue and really put the foot on their mouth at work, they were commenting with a friend, and the friend responded, "Oh, congratulations," but in a very sarcastic way, no? And what happens is, like, all of the confetti comes out on both ends. And that is really because understanding keeps being the key. And in order to give information in the right way that will be most likely to be received well, you do have to understand where we're coming from. And it's not only text, it's not only how we put it together, it's situational, it's contextual, and so we still have a lot of ways to go in the technology space to really be able to understand what a user wants, which is not what they say, and it may not even be what they mean. And that is really the work when we're talking back about products of a product manager. We do not just listen to what something wants, we try to get at the core of a problem that makes them have a pain. This is a constant pattern in the AI world too, in which people rush to automate a certain value-adding task without necessarily thinking, where does the value really come from? When we, for example, see how much work has been put on automating coding and development, we fail to understand sometimes that it's not about getting more work done, it is about getting the right work done, about taking the good solutions that will help and delight users rather than just adding on features onto an existing platform.
I can very well recall how on Macs, we have gotten the introduction of reactions. So when you are having already pre-installed in the macOS a reaction that is also adding some sort of confetti, or some reactions that were then coming. And then from the conversations that I was having, to be honest, no one was glad when these reactions were appearing, because no one was expecting that and no one was actually conveying the message to their laptops, please do this reaction. I still don't see many users applying this on purpose, applying this consciously. And that is also something where we do have a certain exposure to the technology, but then with the time evolving, we are seeing the need behind it way better. I think that based on your exposure to semantic search, based on what you have done in the space of reinforcement learning, that is also somewhere where you have seen some deviations from where it started and then where it came. Would you also be able to share a bit on this?
At Inventa, we're working on semantic search, and Pablo and I decided to put it into chatbots so that chatbots will have infinite knowledge. That is what people today call RAG, but at the time we called federated search. We thought it was a cool name. And
It is a cool name.
it was really just giving those users access to infinite knowledge through a chat interface. And today it has become all the rage because you can actually use this pretty well with generative AI as well. And it was all about empowering those users. Now, about reinforcement learning. When I joined Directly, which was the next company, we were also building chatbots, but in a very different way. The chatbots or the support automation that we delivered had 3 layers to it. The first was power users of the company. They will be the first ones to receive a support question, so that if they can answer, they receive a little reward, and the question doesn't have to go to the support team. And eventually we escalated to the agent if it was needed, to the employee of the company. When I joined in, we put in a third layer that was before all of this, which was basically automated answers and flows. The key difference is how this came to be. Instead of building a model on our own behind closed doors and asking the company to write answers, which is the typical method in which chatbots used to work pre-generative AI, what we did is create an RLHF pipeline before even that name was widely used. What we called it is a human-in-the-loop training mechanism. And so what we did is take those same power users of the company that were using the product of the company and bring them in as trainers for the model on our platform, so that they would get rewards not only by answering questions in real time to those users, but by performing the training tasks that we extracted from past experiences of the company. So just for your audience as well, to give a little bit of a hint of how that worked, is we took the transcripts of conversations between support agents and clients of the company, as well as past tickets, passed those all through different mechanisms to cluster them, do topic extraction, and then generate training tasks, actually using GPT-2 back then and BERT, to have those trainers, those humans in the loop, decide which were good questions to link to good answers, how to improve the answers so that users really connect better with the solution. And we really saw a huge change in how these solutions perform, because the automation was no longer built by, let's say, a bunch of engineers on our side and corporate employees on the other, but rather the automation was being built by the same users, people that knew a lot about the experience with that tool and could provide answers that would not only satisfy the technical solution, but would also speak to what the user is feeling at the moment that they have that technical issue. Between that and the better understanding of language, because the users training the system, they know what language they would use to ask about this feature that is not working, or how can I do X new thing, no? But the company has a very limited knowledge of how a user would think about their product, and more so a support agent. A support agent may be in touch with some users, but they don't know how a user is experiencing everything on the platform. So going back to the initial question, we saw RLHF as really a way to align, which is the word that is used today, the way that the chatbot at the time works with a user to how a user wants to work with an automated assistant. And that really changed the satisfaction of users using the platform. The delta between the chatbots that we deployed at Inventa and these three-pronged solution with automation, human experts, and then agents on the back was humongous. And that is also why on the list of clients for Directly, we had an impressive cadre from Microsoft to Airbnb to Samsung. We build IVRs and chatbots for some of the most innovative and biggest companies in the US. And I think I would merit more than anything that capacity to bring in human knowledge to really educate the AI on how to work well for users.
We have always started building chatbots back then with the intent in mind, and that was with regards to the transaction of the user, mostly selling. I have seen the adoption of this being very strong exactly in e-commerce segment. And at the same time for you, that has meant that you needed to understand what questions to ask. And while retraining the algorithm, you have also observed that certain questions do correlate with people better than others, especially with regards to their needs and their wants, even if they don't particularly ask that. It is super interesting.
Point, because the intent may not be encoded in the words, but the words may actually point to a different original intent. And the best people to know that are the users themselves, better than the company that is developing the product, or us as integrators in the middle that don't know that much about the subject matter expertise or how to use the product of the company. The only real way to connect your users with good automation is putting your users to help you build that automation system.
And coming closer to what you have started doing, to actually work with the audience that is the closest to the process of understanding user needs, namely the people working in product management. in one of your LinkedIn posts, you have mentioned something called PM paradox. Code generation is something that is already having presence. There are metrics that define how software engineers are working better. However, that hasn't been that much of the case with PMs. That is still probably the case that they are very actively using the general generative AI tools and not exactly the ones that are suited particularly for PM tasks. Would you also see that within PM paradox?
Absolutely. I do think that there are a couple of trends that have brought us to this point with product management. And I do not think that the majority of companies see product management as what it should be. Way too often, product managers today are the busiest people in their teams, the busiest people in their companies. And that is partially because they've been pushed to do the work of 4 people. It used to be that product managers will have more support from product owners, scrum masters, project managers. But as layoffs kept happening and companies misunderstood what product orgs' objectives are, they became more Jira janitors. And this is because the day-to-day work is really important. So product managers have to get, in the end, those features moving. They have to get the team busy. And a lot of times you are bogged down with, I need to prepare the tasks for this next sprint that is starting tomorrow. And that, even if it's necessary, is a much lower value task than talking to users, researching the problem space, identifying possible solutions, iterating on those with the market, even from a design or mock-up or first approach stage. And I ascribe quite a lot to Keegan's point of view in that product should be the fabric that unites and that puts a mission in the minds of everybody at the company. Product managers shouldn't be just creating tasks for others to execute on. They really should be talking to customers much more often. They should be doing research much more often. But those tasks do not have a deadline. And because of that, most folks end up dedicating their time to finishing those release notes, putting the updates on Jira, updating the 3 stakeholders that need to know how this release is going. The paradox, particularly that I refer to, is that it is very easy to visualize, once you put it on a chart, how much time PMs are spending on the low value adding, non-interesting tasks for them that make them actually churn much faster than in those high value adding, enjoyable tasks that really PMs became PMs for. To talk to users, to understand the problem space, and to create solutions that delight customers and users. And this is, I think, a perversion, in a way, of the market. The other trend, separate to the number of roles that are now really done by a PM, is the fact that AI is not helping with this. The majority of solutions that we've seen in the market right now have been focused on helping developers write code faster, helping QA be done faster, tests be written faster, and very little, if not none, that really helps the PMs do the part of the job that can actually be automated, which is the documentation, the project planning, the management of a project once it starts. And we believe that this is mostly because the folks that have been building around AI have been closer or come from that engineering development background. And so it is easier to identify a problem when you've been in it. Not that many folks with a product manager background, with a real user experience research jobs, has had an opportunity to build as much for their own thrive. And I really think that if we continue in this direction, the only thing we're going to see is as developers become X more productive, that the bottleneck moves upstream. Development will get commoditized eventually. But if we do that, we're going to be able to build much faster, but build the wrong things. Companies will not be differentiated by having more features out, more buttons, more integrations, as much as by building the right things. You solve the user problems that they set out to solve. And if this doesn't change, we will see more soulless products, more grey products that, yes, have a lot of features and work very well, but they don't really speak to what the users need. We will see more reactions on MacBook and Facebook rather than solutions that help us actually have a good conversation, which is what we are after. We're after getting feedback from people. If we were talking, for example, specifically about the reactions, it may be necessary that these companies sit down and see what users will want to receive Imagine that you're doing a webinar on a similar tool. No? You may actually want to give your users an easier way to react to what you're saying, but you may want it to be in a way that the user wants to do it, so that it is completely implicit in their intent. That gives you the variance of reactions, so that you can know when people is deeply interested, just support your point, found that funny, or even negative reactions, which rarely we see in a lot of these tools. No? But as somebody that also talks in public quite a bit, you will know that there's nothing better than the critical feedback to make one's experience overall improve over time.
It does sound like another $1 billion idea to build on top of Zoom, to actually let speakers know some reactions from the audience even in real time, because generally speaking, speakers can adapt to what they see, what they hear, and if they understand that, and it is always difficult from the other side, from the stage side, to understand whether something has been clear or not. At the same time, it does sound like there is the potential for having reactions being used for that. To your previous point, I would also see the fact of PMs being very multidisciplinary, meaning that there is Jira, there is email, there is Slack, there are all other things. Those all tasks are having completely different scope, completely different speed. And that has always been the case with machine learning, that it is very important to define clear tasks. With supervised machine learning, you needed to have a very clear labeled data set, because otherwise your model would not perform. Now we have already started working with more of self-supervised and unlabeled data sets. But what I also can see there is that as soon as we are having multidisciplinary necessity coming along, then we will be failing. That is what probably each and every person who has ever tried agentic framework right now has seen. That, well, probably on one stage it is all right, but then when it is passing over, or whether there should be the decision that is it necessary to pass over to the next agent or not, that is where it is failing. And that is also why probably for PMs, the AI tooling is not that strongly present, because it is difficult to switch between tasks, how PMs are currently doing that. At the same time, what I would be very curious to learn from you is that what do you actually see as the main job to be done by AI when it comes to product managers? What is in it for them? Do you think that that will help with switching between tasks, or will it indeed be very good at certain tasks that currently are on more organizational or burdensome side?
There are, I think, two very important sides to that question. One is where can it help today with the technology that we have, and where should we build more so that it can actually help in these roles. Why I separated between the two is because we already have very interesting capabilities within the available tools that PMs can use. And there is very good content about how you can do certain things a little better. AI is amazing at aggregating a lot of different sources of information into digestible insights. So going to your point about context switching and tool use, PMs usually have the most tools in the organization because they are the fabric that connects the different teams. So they have to know what is happening on engineering side on Jira, be able to communicate that in their product board, share that on Slack, put that into Google Slides for the executive, and of course then use whichever tool a customer is using so that you can communicate with them. And I think that in this sense, AI can help a lot on summarizing, aggregating, and presenting information. So even if you're talking about Jira requirements, processing calls, even if I haven't seen a solution that helps you do this completely automatically, I know of many PMs that are using AI today to extract transcripts from their conversations with users and then passing those transcripts through a system that will allow them to summarize that into insights. Then do that across multiple client conversations and then aggregate and add numbers to each of the ideas that came up, the feature requests, etc., so that you can actually track which stakeholders, which clients talked or wanted each of the solutions, each of the new features. There is also a lot of help on parsing information that you may not understand. So as you said also in that question, I think is very interesting, is that PMs are very multidisciplinary and they don't all come from the same experiences. In fact, PM is probably one of the roles that have the most people sourced from all over the stack. You have engineers that become PMs, you have MBA business people that become PMs, designers that become PMs, salespeople that become PMs. And really this creates a space in which you cannot necessarily generalize of what is a PM good at. No, because some of them actually write very good code. Some of them can actually get in front of a client and sell a solution. The problem is that they always have holes wherever their expertise is not. And that is another area where AI today can already help. Imagine that you ask an engineer, why did this not come released on Friday, as we had discussed, no? And they give you a very lengthy explanation of the issue that they're having with a library. You may think that that is, a Cyrillic Egyptian, that you understand maybe 3 words in between. But now you can actually give that to a ChatGPT, a Claude, and work through the explanation so that it can bring it to the level of insight that you would understand. So that you can actually even suggest possible solutions that the engineer hasn't thought of, because now you're seeing it from a completely different perspective. So that is where it can already help. I do still think that there is a lot of work to do to really help PMs on their day-to-day, to bring all of these different ideas into a seamless experience and to create for the rest of the tasks that today they still have to do manually. And the ones that have come up the most on our interviews, we've been talking to product managers for the last few months. We may be going on like 200 interviews between CPOs all the way to PMs. And the thing that we hear the most is the pain that it is to keep documentation up to date, write product requirements that everybody can agree on and that the company gets aligned before work starts. And then once everybody is aligned, you still have to transform those 20-page documents into maybe 70 Jira tasks that are coherent, that work up to the same objective, and that motivate, in a way, the engineering team to also work on the same problem. Because that is also the responsibility of the PM, having the company aligned towards that same goal. And that is specifically, this latter space is where we decided to build. We decided to build Centric particularly so that we can take these manual tasks, these very high time consuming tasks, away from the PM so that they can still put their human judgment on top of everything that is happening, but they don't have to be clicking away at the keyboard to write 20 Jira tasks from what was a unreadable document, so that they can export from that unreadable document excerpts that would be what each of the team needs. You may not want to just share a 20-page doc with the executive, like, hey, here's the feature that we're going to release in 3 weeks. Or with engineering, you want to be able to extract an ERD, engineering requirements document from a PRD, and get an executive summary that just focuses on the value, the key propositions, the KPIs for an executive. That doesn't need to understand how engineering is going to perform this function, but rather just needs to buy into the value that we're going to give to users when we actually get this to market. Every PM should start using AI as much as they can, even if it's just to test what are the areas that they work better with it and to learn how to have those interactions, because there will be more of them and there will be more tools created and they need augmentation. It is one of the roles that needs it the most, both from understanding and translating from different stakeholders to actually doing a lot of their manual work that doesn't require their expertise. So why not outsource that to something that they can be an overseer of, but that can do all of their manual work for them?
Yeah. I would be also very curious on, actually learning how many clicks does it take not only for the user to achieve the goal that they have had, but also to understand how many clicks was necessary for the PM to have a certain release of a new feature. That would be a very funny metric to review.
And huge. It would be a very big number on today's world. How many tools would be maybe an easier one to get to start? Because that is probably over 10.
But that is where I would be especially curious about your perspective on interface. Because I have recently seen the presentation of VP of Product at OpenAI that was describing exactly how they're using AI for product management tasks. And it was rather clear to me what are the approaches that are being used. So to analyze, to classify, to maybe summarize certain customer feedback, to also use ChatGPT to have the recent trends being reviewed. What was, though, very confusing to me was the fact, it shouldn't have been confusing because, of course, the VP of Product at OpenAI would show how to use ChatGPT for these tasks. But then I was thinking about data drift. I was thinking about exact these 10 tools that you should pretty much copy paste into if you are a PM and you are willing to have this new feature release done with ChatGPT. So would you envision this more as what has been recently released as a real-time API, meaning that you are talking to a certain tool and then screen sharing, so that you are not copy-pasting the information from one place to another? Would you see that more on the level of integrations into browser? Would you see this more the place to be, at the same time having data connectors to different other places? Is that something that you have already had the chance to have one point on?
Yeah, and in fact, I was on the same webinar, hearing Nate and the team talk about how they use Canvas after they released that the previous day. I find it pretty interesting. Of course, they're going to use ChatGPT being their main tool. And I'm pretty sure that it's not the only thing they use. It is what they broadcasted as well. I do think it's very useful. I think it can be useful to iterate, to summarize exactly the things that you said, to classify. And the problem is that it only gets you like 10% of the way there. It gets you started. The best thing to interact with a ChatGPT for all of this is to not have to confront the dreaded blank page and actually start from a draft that can already get you somewhere. I think that actually the other points that you say are what would up-level this type of solutions. Integrations, for example, and data importation, data import is key for any PM tool, because you are going to need to interact with information that is siloed, that is fragmented, and sometimes that is not even in a tool, but actually in somebody's head. So you actually need to be able to interact with even conversational tools like Slack or even emails, transcripts from meetings. Going to your real-time API point as well, yes, that would be an amazing solution if it worked in the full way, or when it works in the full way. It will be a good companion to have. Now, there's a couple of big concerns with it, of course, one of them being privacy. How many things can you actually take from the information that you see in my screen? And two, functionality. So when it is doing that, what it actually does is take shots of your video every second or every n milliseconds. And so what it then does is try to understand text that may be in your window, no? But if you're in a window that has Google Docs, there's a lot of text there from extensions, file, click here, that is not relevant. So you're also wasting a lot of context, and the repeat shots that are then extracting text is just not going to give you a tenth of the quality that it would if you just copied the document that you're looking at into ChatGPT and talked about it. So it is an incredible tool. I do think that this is more still like a research preview, just like ChatGPT, the first version was, and we still are to see how well it will be implemented in a real workflow. It is very nice to do a couple of demos, and we're at that stage. But it is not yet, I think, the tool that I would recommend PMs to use. If it is a PM hearing about AI for the first time, which is very unlikely, given your audience as well, of course, get on it. If you've already used it, but you don't think that it has given you great results, we know for a fact that it can give you pretty good results. So do spend the time on trying to up-level yourself. Get the most value that you can out of this new tool. It's not nothing more than a tool, but one that you should add to your tool belt. And of course, if you already passed that stage, you would have realized that these tools also fall short because they get you 10% of the way there, but you need something to put it all together, to reduce the number of clicks and copy-pastes, and to actually perform full tasks. And that is where companies like mine, like Wiser as well, like ChatPRD, all of these companies are trying to solve a segment of the PM problem and put it in a way that you can actually get a full end result, no? ChatPRD, for example, is one of the most popular on this space, and still it solves a relatively small problem, just helping you write those requirement documents. It doesn't yet follow your templates, or it doesn't connect with the stakeholders. But once it does, or once you can push that information into somewhere else, it really starts to save you time that even ChatGPT couldn't. And ChatGPT won't, because they are a consumer general tool. They are not going to specialize on each of the verticals. They are going to work for the masses in a way. And a good thing to know, and I think that you pointed to this earlier as well, is that when we specialize a model to do something, and in this case we specialize it to be generic, we're not making as good as we could on a specific task. And that is a big delta as well. Like when you want something to do very well at your area, you need to have a model or a system that is designed for that. If you use generic tools for something very specific, you will eventually find them lackluster.
In the very end, generic models do provide generic results. That is definitely the case. I'm also reflecting on the fact that, well, you have had already around or even more than 200 interviews. At the same time, there have been many companies involved, and I can imagine that the introduction of the tool for PMs won't be just the tool for PMs. It would also involve software engineers, it would also involve certain representatives from the C-suite that should actually take the decision of rolling it out for the whole company. Those conversations that you have had, and also your previous point on the fact that PMs are indeed the people who are getting the tasks that software engineers are not doing. What would you see as the most helpful way of PMs to actually talk to their managers, to their counterparts in introducing something for their workflows? What would be that compelling aspect that they can highlight and either build something in-house or come to Centric or maybe utilize ChatPRD more? What would you see there?
Well, that is a very good question, and one that we've also been playing with quite a bit, because we need to speak to every stakeholder that is involved in this process. And you identify them pretty well. Is the individual contributor, the product manager that is doing the work on the trench lines, the CPO or COO that is managing the organization of product, and the engineers that are actually receiving that work, no? and outputting what they need so that the product feature actually happens. The product manager is the easier one to approach, and we'll start there. And it's obviously saving time on the things that they don't want to do so they can actually dedicate more time to the things that are more value-adding and that they enjoy doing. Now, this is not necessarily what will sell a CPO onto making their PMs more efficient. The easy conversation or the easy way to grasp is just if you make your team more efficient, you need less people to do the same thing. But that is really not a way that we like to do things, particularly not at Centric. And so how I'd really like to talk about this is that you hired people that had a talent for deciding how to solve a problem. You did not hire people that knew how to rewrite a document 20 times into what 7 different stakeholders want. And so what you're doing is either overpaying for a Jira janitor or not hiring the right roles. For executives, the message is clear, is that you want to build the best product possible and you want to build it fast. So why put a bottleneck on your product management? Why make the people that is really going to decide how you create value be the busiest and unable to think about those crucial aspects? Of course, there's even more benefits to an executive. Like if you really have a tool that can tell you what everybody is working on, how your milestones are tracking, if you have an idea that you want to implement, can also tell you that, well, if you want to do it now, these other 3 milestones will be impacted by this much time. But you can also do it in 3 weeks and it will give you the most throughput on your releases. That type of interaction is really what an executive wants to have with their product team, that sometimes take hours, if not days, of back and forth of the executive telling the PM speaking with engineering, and this becomes also a broken telephone. Communication is the most important thing in a company, and the PM is really the one in charge for that message to go up and down the stream. You need to free up those people. The PM should be the least busy person in the company because he's the person that needs the most time to think how your product will get to market, how it will solve a user problem, and how are you really going to create value. If those people are busy, who is doing that? You don't need Jira janitors. You need product people that can understand your users and build for them. And that is really the message that we try to impart on the executives that we talk to. Now, I will also say that the majority of executives that I talk to are very much on this space of thinking as well. They actually come to us as well with a problem. I've heard from a couple of them that they are sad that they hired these brilliant people to be working on the product and they see them day in and day out telling them that they don't even have time to talk to users because they have these many meetings with engineering, sales is pulling on the time, and then they need time in the evenings to write the work that needs to happen. And so not everybody needs to be convinced of that message, but it is also the one that we prefer to impart on the market, because we don't think that just pure automation is what is going to solve a problem. It needs to be very thoughtful and it needs to be putting the human at the center. One thing that I haven't mentioned before, but I really think is key to all of this, is that Product management is the skill of the future of work. Development will get commoditized, as we talked about, but it's impossible to commoditize empathy. And you need to have somebody that will understand what is really the pain that makes them say that thing, so that they can actually come back, understand the space and build something that would really solve that original problem. If you don't have that, you will end up with a soulless product, one that may actually perform well on cost savings for a while until a better tool comes along and takes over your market.
Beautifully said. And that also makes me think on how this will also work for the companies where the executives, for example, haven't yet come to you and haven't yet talked about it. And maybe for some listeners of the podcast, it would be the case that they feel more on the side of Jira janitors. Let's imagine the company is more of smaller or medium size, and they are having indeed very, very limited resources. And generally speaking, there is also the understanding in the executive suite that, well, user research is somewhere happening. Users are coming to us and that is all right. We probably understand their needs already good enough. So why should we actually give more time to one of our very precious resources to do more of empathetical work and not exactly organizational one? If you would have such person in mind, what would you say are the best 3-4 steps that this product manager can actually take in his or her company?
If it's from the perspective of the product management, for the product manager, they are the fabric that is joining the product vision with execution. And yes, that organization is very precious and very important, and they need to be there. But they will not be able to push the product vision as much if they don't understand how it fits on the customer's problems. And you are able to push a lot of features out. They, yes, may not be the right ones. And it is much more important to get one valuable feature out than 10 features that nobody will use. If it's an executive asking the same question, you should be aware that your company has limited resources, not only today, but also over time. And if you are keeping everybody just as busy as they can be, you are opening very few windows into innovation. And there are 20 other companies doing something similar to what your product will be doing, that will be doing things differently. And so your competitive advantage will not be having more throughput for those engineers. It will be actually connecting with your users better. If you think that you're already doing a perfect user research, you don't need to invest more on that necessarily. You may just want to be able to scale your product organization without having to throw bodies into it. And it is much more interesting to have one product manager that knows everything about the product they're working on, that they live and breathe that product, and is able to maintain all of those interactions thanks to the tools that you provide them, than having that work be divided into 3 PMs. And each of the PMs work on a single area and then have to have the same broken telephone happen between them. Imagine that instead of having those vertical PMs, you end up hiring another 2 PMs, one to really interact with engineering and one to interact with customers. Then you're really breaking that cycle of communication, because the one that interacts with customers will write notes that then will become a report that then will be shared on a meeting. By that time, that person has forgot about half the conversations they've had. Then the PM that actually is working on vision will take those, and again, the broken telephone will create a set of milestones, a set of features that would be quite interesting to have to solve what they have read on the notes of another person. And then the one that is interacting with engineering will transform those into readable, workable tasks that engineering can work on. You can see how each of these barriers breaks down the linkage to value. A couple of things can happen on this. Of course, you can end up working on the wrong thing because you haven't validated maybe that with users. You haven't really have the conversation that told you that yes, they mentioned these 3 things, but when they were talking, they had a huge emotional load on this first thing. So maybe actually developing on that and forgetting about the 2 and doing that one very well will create a much happier customer than if you fulfill every spoken need, which may not be the source of the real pains. But it also will create a lot of churn along the organization, because there's nothing worse for execution than engineers not believing on what they're building. And in order to bring in that motivation, it is the PM that really needs to know why we're doing something so they can transmit that same feeling onto the engineering team. So the engineering team can build excitedly about what they're putting out, because you need everybody to excel. You don't just need more bodies. What ideally you want is high performers, highly motivated, that really understand the problem space that they're working on. And if that's not what you're after, you might as well just outsource most of your work to external companies. Because the value of really having a team is to have a mission that speaks to all of what they're doing. That they have a North Star that they can point to and say, I work towards that. Have engineers proud of saying that, that feature, we built that. And have the product manager happy that they're really solving a problem, which is usually the main motivation that helps them become product managers.
So, a short takeaway for every executive, an employee is not a number. It is the person that is having certain wishes and wants to fulfill customer needs, because that is the very good driver for why we are doing something.
I do like how Simon Sinek puts it as well on the start with why. It's a very good motivational speaker. If anybody that is listening to this hasn't heard Simon Sinek talk about his Start with Why book, it is a very worth read, particularly for product managers.
A bit on the personal side and on your personal why. Because you have been around in Silicon Valley for some years, you have worked a lot, especially on all the possible things that we have discussed before. At the same time, you have had the chance to take a bit longer leave. And I would be curious on how was it? What has it taught you?
Well, ironically, first, that sabbatical was supposed to be a whole year that I decided to take after 10 years in Silicon Valley for reasons that we'll get into too. But the problem is that 5 months into the sabbatical, a huge development in my field came down, and that was ChatGPT. And of course, when something like that happens in your industry, you take heed and you come back to work. And so when ChatGPT came in, I saw the same type of wave happening of people rushing to automate things that didn't need automation. And I really wanted to be a new force in the field, using all of my expertise to actually build something that would augment those humans. But the real reason is that, of course, startup work is grinding work. And 10 years from one startup to another, it's quite consuming. One thing that not everybody in your audience would know, but you would know, and I know, is that being an immigrant also has its own load on your life, from both directions. One, the people that you leave behind and that you're missing dearly. And two, the fact that when you're in a new country, there is, of course, bureaucracy, but also a lot of pressure. Depends on the type of visa you have. And particularly for work visas in the US, you cannot have breaks between jobs. If you have more than 60 days between positions, you will be invited to leave the country. It also means that you're in a different negotiating position when you have an employer, because the employer knows this and is the responsible one to sponsor you for the next visa, to help you get a green card. And I was lucky enough to get an amazing set of bosses through my career that helped me through these things. But still, even then, you have a stress that builds up of when am I going to be able to get a new visa? Am I going to win the lottery? Because the work visa is random. It's random in the sense that you enter a lottery and a certain percentage of people is accepted and the other is not. And it is absolutely random. It's not based on profile. It's just they have a coupon and they fill it out with basically a bingo machine. And it is a pity, but it's also how they have to do it so that there are no biases as well or anything like that. But it is very stressful to be an immigrant in the end. And I saw that opportunity because I had also gotten my green card a few months before the sabbatical, and it had been right after COVID. And so you can imagine, I had spent 2 years in the US without being able to leave. And that meant 2 years without seeing family, 2 years without seeing long, dear friends. And I took that opportunity to travel, yes, but also spend time with the people that I loved and that I was missing for oh so long. I, of course, regret nothing of it. And I would also say that that time away from the busy work is really what helped me crystallize not just the work that I had done into knowledge, but a vision to create a concise yet very inherent to me idea of how I see the world and how I want to impact it. The busy work prevents you sometimes from deep thought, and This is well known from thinkers of the past, that the knowledge happens when you're in it, but the ideas happen when you get out of it. Einstein, Newton, everybody that you can read on this, they would tell you that the biggest ideas that they had when they were doing a walk in a park, when they were coming back from a cafe with friends, and not when they were actually running the numbers or something. And I think that that dichotomy sometimes is missed a lot in Silicon Valley. We are so much in it, so workaholic at times, yet that I think we build, work, and this ties back to my vision in particular, that it is not important to just work more, it's important to work on the right things. And this matters to an individual and it matters to a company. And for that, you do have to create the space for your brain to process everything that it has seen on the previous months, years, or even just every week, maybe time with family. It may be getting those walks that you always talk about but you never take because another email came in. And so taking time to get out of it, it's actually very productive, even if it doesn't seem like it at face value.
That is such a beautiful perspective, and it does tie extremely well with what Centric is currently doing. Wonderful. Jorge, where actually the listeners could find you and reach out to you? What would be the best medium to interact with you?
The best medium, if you're in the Bay Area, could be a coffee. And if you are not, then LinkedIn. You can find me as Jorge Alcantara. Will be linked somewhere here. And if we connect, you can even see my email and my content. And let's exchange thoughts. I'm always looking for new perspectives on product management, on AI, and really how we can use technology to be better humans.
Wonderful words for the end. Thanks a lot for your time, and thanks a lot for your empathetical approach to the regular things that we do every day. Bye.
Thank you, Irina. That was a lot of fun. Cheers.
AI catch up brings the news. Tech solutions users can't refuse.